"Everyone look, he embodies the perfect Aryan," says the highest-ranking Nazi official about the only Jewish person in the Hitler Youth class he was teaching. Yeah, astute. The memoir I chose was Europa Europa by Solomon Perel, and although the book itself never received an award, the German film adaptation was nominated for several and ended up winning a few, such as the National Board of Review Award for Best Foreign Language Film in 1991, a Golden Globe for Best Foreign Language Film in 1992. Solomon wrote his story in 1983, long after the events took place. He wrote it right before he had heart surgery. He did this because he had a fear that no one would believe his story, and that accompanied by the guilt of not having to endure so much pain as so many other victims did. He felt he owed the world his story. To summarize the story, a young Jewish boy growing up in Germany was on the run from the Nazis coming into power. He and his family had moved to Poland, where they thought they'd be safer, but of course, Poland was then invaded. And so, as Poland fell, Solomon's parents decided to send Perel and his brother to safety to the communist side in the Soviet Union. There, they were met by a Jewish organization of refugees and sent to a Soviet orphanage where he and his brother were presumably safe. Little did they know they were not safe. Their orphanage was actually overrun by Nazis. And so he fled, but like any good story, he had to have gotten captured. He and his brother were separated, but he had convinced the Germans that had captured him that he was on their side, basically, that the communists had killed his parents. The only reason he wasn't murdered was because he told them that his name was Joseph Perel instead of Solomon Perel. The Nazis took him in. He was now to be the translator for the German Wehrmacht unit. That is, the unit that was fighting front lines, actually. Later, he was delivered to the Hitler Youth Organization, where he would then stay for 4 years. Residing in an organization that was based off of the hatred and killing of your people, he had to obviously maintain his cool and conceal his true identity. This confusion of identity is the biggest theme throughout this book, and is what I'm going to be focusing on. This memoir sheds light on what wasn't known about World War II, while also refurbishing much of the unadulterated history we already know. The book aims to inform others of Solomon's struggles, both the obvious struggle to survive, as well as the underlying interior struggles he endured. I saw this book as an outlet, as a reminder that even when millions are suffering, many struggle in different ways. He feels a sense of guilt that he did not have experience the physical torment, but emotionally and cerebrally, I think that he had been pushed to extremes. I personally believe that his recounts entail deeper meaning than survival and miraculous journeys through hell and back. Solomon's struggle with identity and pride, submission versus determination, as well as urge versus resistance, are all prevalent and abundant in the book to give extra layers of meaning, to truly depict what was happening at the time. Just before this passage, a Nazi official named Heinz just tried to rape Solomon and found out that he was circumcised, which would have given him away. Right off the bat, the diction that's used alludes to a sense of cruelty in the Nazi army, almost like it's a slaughterhouse, which is exactly how it's then described. The innocence and purity and heartlessness are juxtaposed, and using the cats as a symbol of defenselessness, just as the Jews are when the Nazis take joy in their murder. The meowing terribly and screams are symbolic of screams of terror. Naked and defenseless signify that he is now declothed and desensitized, disarmed to any sense of defense that he might have left. Solomon is now using his older and more experienced voice in this passage. This is only done a couple times in this book, and it is done to emphasize the trauma and severity of the situation that he was once put in. When it says the thoughts one has before dying, he is reflecting on his assurance of death, the last submission of a completely devoted Solomon, as opposed to a completely devoted Jupp or Joseph. American soldiers had just invaded Hitler's youth, signifying that the World War II is over. This section refers to the author's theme about struggling with identity. This desire to revert back to Solomon is stunned, more obviously by fear, but also by this underlying interior conflict. Lack of motion, as in shock, or just stood there, or wouldn't come, all signify that Solomon has trouble reacting to fear. When asked to remove Nazi insignia, he couldn't be more obliged, but upon removing it and putting it as far away as he couldn't help but wonder what it all meant now. Who was he? This perfectly embodies his conflict. Who was I now? It's suspended. He feels motionless. He's still stunned, still reactionless. Is he Joseph or Solomon? I didn't know my true identity. Whether or not Solomon figures out who he truly is resides in the final chapters, and I guess you'll have to read it to figure it out. Solomon wanted to let his voice be heard, his story told, and to rewrite textbooks and the way people interpret struggles. After all this time, the unbelievability constantly surprised me and intrigued me. Anyone with a historical curiosity, or maybe even one who prefers mystery novels, would love Solomon Perel's memoir.